I live in a city that glitters at night, in a condo with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the endless river of headlights. I'm the owner of a small but beloved bakery called The Rolling Pin, where the scent of cardamom and melting chocolate is my daily perfume. My life, from the outside, looked like a perfectly crafted macaron, delicate, sweet, and aesthetically pleasing. But inside, it was hollow, and about to crumble spectacularly. This is the story of how my husband tried to break me in the most humiliating way possible, and how I used my own skills to bake up a revenge he never saw coming. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Life with David was a performance. I knew it, and in a way, I had agreed to my role. He was the ambitious marketing director for a high-end fashion label, a man who curated his life like it was a magazine spread. I was the artisanal wife, the charming baker who gave him a touch of grounded authenticity. He loved telling people his wife owned a bakery. It sounded quaint, romantic, a perfect accessory to his polished, corporate existence. He conveniently left out the parts where I was up at 4 a.m., covered in flour, wrestling with a 50-pound bag of sugar, or stressing over payroll for my 3 employees. To him, my bakery was a prop, and my role was to be sweet, supportive, and appropriately impressed by his world. Our condo was his masterpiece. It was a minimalist shrine of chrome, glass, and muted grays. My touch was relegated to a small corner of the kitchen where my cookbooks and a few well-loved copper pots were allowed to exist. David called my corner charming chaos. Everything else was his domain. He chose the furniture, the art, even the brand of soap in the guest bathroom. He said he had an eye for a cohesive aesthetic, which was his way of saying my taste wasn't good enough. In the beginning, I thought it was romantic, that he was building a perfect world for us. I was 24 when we got married, fresh out of culinary school and full of dreams. David was 28, already climbing the corporate ladder, and he seemed so sure of everything. He promised to support my dream of opening a bakery, and he did, with a loan from his father that he never let me forget. "Remember, Phonia," he'd say during any argument about money, "we took a big risk on your little hobby." My little hobby was now a thriving business. The Rolling Pin had a loyal following, glowing reviews in local food blogs, and we were even a finalist for the city's Best New Bakery Award. I was proud of it, of the community I had built. But the more successful the bakery became on its own terms, the less David seemed to like it. It was no longer just his charming investment, it was my success, my creation. He started making subtle digs. "Don't work too late, honey. You don't want to smell like yeast when I get home," he'd say with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Or, "Are you sure you want to wear that apron? It's a bit rustic." The pressure to fit into his world was immense. His friends were a collection of people who seemed to be cut from the same expensive cloth: finance guys with watches worth more than my car, women who ran lifestyle blogs that were really just advertisements for their wealthy husbands' lives, and heirs to fortunes they'd done nothing to earn. At their gatherings, I often felt like a curiosity. They'd ask me about my bakery with a tone of detached amusement, as if I were a child telling them about a lemonade stand. "Oh, that's just so adorable. You actually bake it all yourself?" Jessica, Veronica's replacement in this new reality, was the queen bee of this circle. A self-proclaimed lifestyle brand, she documented her every brunch, vacation, and designer purchase for her thousands of followers. She had a particular talent for making me feel small with a single, perfectly crafted, backhanded compliment. "Phonia, I just love that you're not afraid to be comfortable," she'd say, eyeing my simple dress at a cocktail party where everyone else was in designer labels. David never defended me. He would just laugh and squeeze my shoulder, as if to say, "Isn't she cute?" He wanted me to be part of his world, but only as a silent, smiling accessory. He wanted the idea of me, not the reality of me. The real me was the woman who found joy in perfecting a croissant, who loved the comfortable silence of the early morning, who preferred a worn-out hoodie to a cashmere sweater. The woman David wanted me to be was someone who could discuss the stock market, who knew which fork to use, and who laughed at all the right jokes, no matter how empty they were. The dinner was David's idea. It was to celebrate his promotion to senior marketing director. It wasn't a small, intimate affair. No, it had to be at Aria, the city's most pretentious and expensive restaurant, a place where a single appetizer cost more than a week's worth of groceries. And he invited his inner circle, 10 of his closest friends, including Jessica and her smug husband. I knew, deep down, that this wasn't a celebration. It was a coronation. David's coronation as a man of status, and I was expected to be the flawless, adoring queen. The week leading up to it was tense. He critiqued everything I considered wearing. Too plain, too artsy, too bakery. He finally settled on a deep blue silk dress I'd worn once to a wedding, but insisted I get my hair and makeup professionally done. We need to look the part, Phonia. It's all about brand synergy, he said, as if our marriage was a marketing campaign. The night before the dinner, I was boxing up a large custom cake order at my bakery. My hands, dusted with powdered sugar, were steady as I placed the final decorations. This was my world, where things made sense. Where effort and passion yielded tangible, beautiful results. I felt a sense of dread about the next evening. It felt like I was being led into a gilded cage, and the door was about to be slammed shut. I looked at my reflection in the bakery window, a ghost of a woman in a flour-dusted apron. I didn't recognize the person David wanted me to be, and I was terrified I was losing the person I actually was. That night, I barely slept, feeling the weight of the silk dress hanging in our closet, a silent promise of the performance to come. The air in Aria was thick with the scent of money and perfume. It was a cavernous space of dark wood, gold accents, and hushed whispers. The clinking of glasses sounded like delicate chimes, and the waiters moved with the silent, predatory grace of panthers. David was in his element, gliding through the restaurant, shaking hands, his voice a smooth baritone of practiced confidence. I trailed behind him, my heels sinking slightly into the plush carpet, feeling like a child in borrowed clothes. The blue silk dress felt less like a beautiful garment and more like a costume I hadn't had time to rehearse in. Our table was a long, imposing slab of polished mahogany in a private alcove. His friends were already there, a glittering assembly of perfectly coiffed hair and expensive jewelry. Jessica was holding court at one end, her laughter sharp and loud, drawing everyone's attention. She was wearing a stark white dress that probably cost more than my bakery's monthly rent. When she saw me, her smile widened, but it didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. "Phonia. You made it," she exclaimed, as if my arrival was a delightful surprise. "David, darling, your wife looks lovely." So classic. It was a verbal pat on the head, and everyone around the table seemed to understand the code. David beamed, placing a possessive hand on the small of my back. "She cleans up well, doesn't she?" he said to the table, and they all chuckled. I forced a smile, my cheeks burning. The conversation flowed around me, a torrent of names I didn't know and places I'd never been. They talked about their summer plans in the Hamptons, the trouble with their au pairs, the latest IPOs, and the scandalous affair between two people I'd never met. I tried to join in once, mentioning a new local play I'd seen and enjoyed, but the conversation simply paused for a beat, giving me blank stares, before seamlessly flowing back to the topic of yacht maintenance. It was a clear, unspoken message: my world was not relevant here. I retreated into silence, focusing on the complex architecture of my bread roll. David, sitting beside me, made no effort to include me. He was too busy performing, telling exaggerated stories about his latest marketing coup, his voice booming with self-importance. I watched him, and a profound sense of alienation washed over me. This man, my husband, felt like a stranger. The man I married was once goofy, the one who'd tried to help me knead dough and ended up covering our tiny apartment kitchen in flour. Where had he gone? He'd been replaced by this smooth, polished imposter who called his wife's work quaint. The food came in a procession of tiny, artful plates. Each dish was explained in reverent tones by the waiter, a young man named Ben with kind eyes who seemed to be the only genuine person in the room. I noticed he gave me a small, sympathetic smile each time he cleared a plate I had barely touched. As the wine flowed, David and his friends grew louder, their arrogance amplified by the alcohol. The topic turned to a recent business deal one of them had closed. It was a bloodbath, the man, a hedge fund manager named Todd, bragged. We completely wiped out the competition. They never saw it coming. David, eager to impress, chimed in. That's the only way to do it. You have to be ruthless. No room for sentiment in this game. He then turned to me, a strange, cruel glint in his eye. Phonia wouldn't understand. Her business is all about feelings and sugar. It's not the real world. My stomach tightened. Jessica seized the opportunity. Oh, be nice, David, she purred, dripping with fake sympathy. It's sweet. But he's right, Phonia. It's a different league. My blog's ad revenue last month was more than your bakery probably makes in a year. I felt the blood drain from my face. I could feel 10 pairs of eyes on me, watching, waiting for my reaction. I looked at David, pleading with my eyes for him to step in, to defend me, to be my husband. He just smirked, enjoying the show. He was testing me, pushing me, seeing if I could take the heat of his world. I couldn't. I finally found my voice, though it came out as a shaky whisper. That's not fair, Jessica. My business isn't about making the most money. It's about creating something real for people. Jessica let out a tinkling laugh. Oh, honey. That's what people who don't make money say. The table erupted in laughter. And then came the moment that would shatter everything. David, basking in the approval of his friends, looked directly at me. His face was flushed with wine and pride. He leaned in, his voice low enough for the whole table to hear but laced with a venom that felt like a physical blow. Don't be so sensitive, he hissed. Honestly, Phonia, sometimes your naivety is a disgrace. You have no idea how things work. Just sit there and look pretty. It's what you're good at. Disgrace. The word hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. It echoed in the sudden silence. A disgrace. He hadn't just insulted my business, he had insulted my very being. He had dismissed my intelligence, my passion, my entire identity in front of these horrible, empty people. The smiling mask I had been wearing all night cracked and fell away. I felt a hot, prickling sensation behind my eyes, the sting of unshed tears. But beneath the hurt, a cold, hard knot of anger was forming in my gut. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. The table fell silent. Every eye was on me. David's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Phonia, sit down. Don't make a scene. I looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time in a long time. I didn't see my husband. I saw a weak, insecure man who had to belittle his wife to feel powerful. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'm done. Without another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked with my head held high, past the tables of curious diners, past the bar, and out of the heavy oak doors into the cool night air. The city lights blurred through my tears. I kept walking, putting as much distance as possible between me and that table, between me and that life. It wasn't until I was a block away that my phone buzzed. It was a notification from our joint credit card account. Aria Restaurant, $4,128.57. My heart stopped. He hadn't paid. He had gotten up, told his friends he was going to the restroom to deal with his hysterical wife, and left. He had stuck me with the bill. The humiliation was a fresh wave, so powerful it nearly knocked me off my feet. It wasn't about the money. It was the final, brutal act of contempt. He hadn't just called me a disgrace, he had treated me like one. He left me to clean up his mess, a problem to be settled with a credit card and forgotten. Standing on that cold, lonely street corner, the cold knot of anger in my stomach began to burn. It was no longer just anger. It was fuel. The walk home was a blur. The city's symphony of sirens, horns, and distant music faded into a dull roar in my ears. The only sound I could truly hear was that one word, replaying on a loop, disgrace. Each repetition was a fresh stab, twisting the knife David had so casually lodged in my heart. The cool night air did little to quell the fire in my cheeks. I felt exposed, stripped bare in front of a jury of his smirking peers. The weight of the $4,000 charge on our card felt less like a financial burden and more like a physical shackle. It was the price of my humiliation, a bill for services rendered in my own destruction. When I finally reached our condo, the silence was deafening. The expansive, minimalist space felt cold and unwelcoming, an art gallery with no soul. David wasn't there. A small, cowardly part of me was relieved, but the larger part, the part that was now simmering with a righteous fury, was disappointed. I wanted a confrontation. I wanted to scream. I wanted to take one of the ridiculously expensive, sterile white vases he adored and smash it against the wall. Instead, I stood motionless in the foyer, the clicking of the grandfather clock in the hall counting down the seconds of my shattered marriage. I kicked off my heels, the pain in my feet a dull echo of the pain in my chest. I walked into our bedroom and stripped off the blue silk dress, letting it fall to the floor in a crumpled heap. It felt tainted, a costume from the worst role I'd ever played. I pulled on my oldest, softest sweatpants and a worn-out t-shirt from my bakery. It smelled faintly of vanilla and cinnamon, the scent of my real life. It was like putting on a suit of armor. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from David. No apology. No concern. Just 5 cold words, we will discuss this tomorrow. Not I'm sorry. Not are you okay? Not even where are you? Just a corporate-style summons. He was scheduling my feelings for a more convenient time, like a budget meeting. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. It was then that I knew, with absolute certainty, that this wasn't a fight we could recover from. This was a demolition. I couldn't stay in that apartment, in his perfectly curated cage. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and my phone, and I walked out without a backward glance. I didn't know where I was going, but my car seemed to know the way, navigating the familiar streets to the one place I felt safe, my bakery. The rolling pin was dark and quiet when I let myself in. The air was cool and smelled of yeast and sugar, a comforting, familiar embrace. This was my sanctuary, the one place in the world that was entirely mine. I had built it from nothing, with my own 2 hands. Here, I wasn't a disgrace. I was a creator, a business owner, a boss. I walked past the gleaming display cases and into the large, open kitchen in the back. I flicked on a single low light over my main steel prep table. Then, I did the only thing I could think to do. I started to bake. I pulled out the industrial-sized mixer, the bags of flour, sugar, and butter. I didn't follow a recipe. I worked from instinct, my hands moving with a muscle memory that soothed my fractured mind. I measured, I mixed, I kneaded. With every push and fold of the dough, I worked through my anger. The rhythmic thud of the dough against the steel table was a counterpoint to the frantic beating of my heart. I kneaded out the humiliation from Jessica's sneer. I punched down the dough, imagining David's smug face. I shaped loaves of brioche, my fingers expertly tucking and rolling, creating order out of the chaos of my emotions. Hours passed. The sun began to hint at its arrival, painting the dark sky with shades of gray and lavender. The ovens were on, filling the kitchen with a warm, life-affirming heat. The smell of baking bread filled every corner of the room. As I pulled the first golden brown loaves from the oven, my phone, which I'd left on the counter, buzzed insistently. It was my best friend, Chloe. I had texted her a frantic, garbled message hours ago. I ignored the call, but a moment later, a text came through. Phonia, I'm outside. Please let me in. I unlocked the front door and Chloe rushed in, her face etched with worry. She took one look at me, my tear-stained face, my flour-dusted clothes, the frantic energy of the kitchen, and wrapped me in a hug. I finally let go, sobbing into her shoulder, the weeks of suppressed frustration and the raw pain of the evening pouring out of me. She listened patiently as I recounted the entire night, from the backhanded compliments to the final, soul-crushing insult. I told her about the bill, about David's text, about his utter lack of remorse. Chloe, a fiercely loyal graphic designer who had created my bakery's logo, listened with a thunderous expression on her face. That man, she said, her voice dangerously quiet when I was finished, is a monster. A narcissistic, emotionally stunted monster. She looked around the kitchen, at the dozens of perfect loaves of bread cooling on the racks. So this is what you do? You get betrayed and you create all this? I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, leaving a streak of flour on my cheek. It's all I know how to do, I whispered. He thinks this place is a joke. A hobby. He called me a disgrace for it. He's the disgrace, Phonia, Chloe said firmly. He's threatened by this. Because you built this. It's real. His world is fake. It's all smoke and mirrors and overpriced dinners. This, she said, gesturing to the warm, fragrant kitchen, is substance. Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit. She was right. David's world was an illusion, propped up by money and status. My world was built on tangible things, flour, butter, sugar, hard work. People came to my bakery for a moment of genuine comfort and joy. What did people go to David for? A sales pitch. Chloe picked up one of the warm loaves of brioche. So, what are you going to do? I looked at her, the exhaustion of the night giving way to a new, unfamiliar feeling. It was a cold, clear-eyed resolve. The insult, the bill, the text, they weren't just attacks. They were a gift. They had shattered the gilded cage and set me free. The echo of the word disgrace was still there, but its meaning had changed. It was no longer a brand on my soul. It was a declaration of war. I don't know yet, I said, my voice stronger now. But I know one thing. He thinks my world is small and insignificant. He's about to find out how wrong he is. I'm done being his charming accessory. I'm going to take everything he tried to mock and I'm going to build an empire with it. I didn't go back to the condo. I couldn't. The thought of sleeping in that cold, gray bedroom next to David made my skin crawl. Chloe let me crash on her couch, a cozy, lived-in space filled with art books, half-finished canvases, and the scent of turpentine. It was a world away from the sterile environment I had called home, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I spent the next day in a fog, running my bakery on autopilot, the kind words of my regular customers a stark contrast to the cruelty of the previous night. David, true to his word, tried to discuss it. He called. I ignored him. He texted, his messages evolving from annoyed to demanding. Phonia, this is childish. Call me. Then, are you seriously giving me the silent treatment over a joke? And finally, your half of the dinner bill is $2,064. You can transfer it to me whenever you're ready to be an adult. That last text was the final nail in the coffin of the woman I used to be, the one who would have apologized, who would have smoothed things over to keep the peace. Reading it, I felt nothing but a cold, clarifying rage. He wasn't just unapologetic, he was billing me for my own public execution. It was so transactional, so devoid of emotion, that it was almost comical. He truly believed this was a simple disagreement, a minor spat. He had no idea he had detonated a bomb in the middle of our lives. That evening, Chloe and I sat on her living room floor, surrounded by takeout containers and my bakery's financial ledgers, which I had brought over from the shop. Okay, she said, her laptop open. If you're going to do this, you need to be smart. You need to untangle yourself from him completely. First step, finances. As we started digging, the first cracks in David's perfect facade began to appear. We logged into our joint accounts, the ones David primarily managed. I had always trusted him with the big picture stuff, while I focused on the bakery's day-to-day finances. It was a foolish, naive mistake. The numbers didn't add up. There were significant credit card charges at hotels I'd never been to, expensive jewelry stores I'd never set foot in, and recurring payments to a consultant I'd never heard of. The amounts were staggering, hidden within pages of statements I had never bothered to scrutinize. "Who is Viridian Consulting?" Chloe asked, pointing to a monthly charge of $2,000 for the past 6 months. I had no idea. A quick search online revealed that Viridian Consulting was a shell. It had no website, no public presence, nothing. It was a ghost. But the address listed for the company was in a very upscale part of the city. "And look at this," I said, my voice trembling slightly as I pointed to a charge from a boutique called Seraphine for over $5,000. "I've never shopped there. That's Jessica's favorite store." The pieces started to click into place, each one more sickening than the last. The late nights he claimed were work dinners. The mysterious business trips he said I'd be bored on. The way he always angled his phone away from me. It wasn't just about money. He wasn't just careless, he was deceitful. He was funding a second life, and I was subsidizing it. The loan his father gave us for the bakery? We had paid it back years ago. But he still held it over my head, a convenient tool of control. A few days later, a strange thing happened. A young man came into the bakery. He looked familiar, and it took me a moment to place him. It was Ben, the waiter from area, the one with the kind eyes. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he ordered a coffee. When I handed it to him, he slipped a folded piece of paper across the counter. "I'm sorry about what happened the other night," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "That was awful." My manager felt so bad, he comped half the bill. The total was only around $2,000. He gestured to the note. "That's a copy of the actual, final receipt. Your husband, he made me charge the full, original amount to your card before the discount was applied. And he took the refund in cash. I thought you should know." He gave me a final, sympathetic look before hurrying out of the shop. I unfolded the paper. There it was, in black and white. The original bill, over $4,000. And below it, the manager's 50% discount, bringing the total to just over $2,000. And then, the credit card slip showing the full charge. He hadn't just stuck me with the bill. He had actively scammed me, pocketing over $2,000 in cash while simultaneously billing me for it via text. It was so petty, so gratuitously cruel, that I almost laughed. This wasn't the action of a powerful, successful man. It was the move of a common thief. This was the evidence I needed. It was no longer just about my hurt feelings. This was about fraud. This was about a calculated, long-term deception. The cracks in the foundation of our marriage had split wide open, revealing a rotten, hollow core. That night, I called my brother. I didn't have one in real life, but in this story, a lawyer brother named Leo became my confidant. I explained everything to him, my voice cold and methodical as I laid out the financial discrepancies, the shell company, and the fraud from the restaurant. Leo, ever the calm and logical one, listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Phonia," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "this is more than just grounds for divorce. This is criminal. He's been embezzling from your shared assets. We can destroy him." "No," I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind, as clear and precise as a recipe. "I don't want to destroy him in a courtroom. That's his world, his game. I want to beat him in mine. He thinks my world is about feelings and sugar. He thinks I'm a naive little baker. He thinks I'm a disgrace." I looked around Chloe's apartment, my gaze landing on a cookbook I had brought from my bakery. The title seemed to jump out at me. The art of pâtisserie, precision, patience, and presentation. I'm going to need your help, Leo, I continued. I need you to find out everything you can about Viridian Consulting and who owns it. I need you to draw up divorce papers, but don't file them yet. And I need you to find out if David's company has a morality clause in their senior executive contracts. A slow smile spread across my face. David thought he was a master of branding and marketing. He was about to get a lesson in all three. My revenge wouldn't be a screaming match or a messy legal battle fought in public. It would be precise. It would require patience. And the presentation, well, the presentation would be exquisite. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in compartmentalization. To the outside world, and to my wonderful, oblivious customers, I was the same Phonia. I was the smiling baker who recommended the Morning Glory muffins and remembered that Mrs. Gable liked her latte extra hot. I perfected a new line of lavender honey eclairs and developed a gluten-free chocolate cake that was so decadent, no one could tell the difference. My bakery became my fortress of solitude, a place where I could channel all my nervous energy and anxiety into productive, beautiful creation. But beneath the surface, behind the sugary smiles and the warm scent of baking bread, I was a woman meticulously crafting a recipe for ruin. My evenings were spent huddled with Chloe and on the phone with my brother, Leo. We were a small, efficient team of strategists. Chloe, with her graphic design skills, was my visual architect. Leo was my legal powerhouse, digging into the dark corners of David's life with a quiet, relentless efficiency. Leo's findings were even worse than I had imagined. Viridian Consulting, the shell company receiving $2,000 a month, was registered to one person, Jessica. Our queen bee friend. It was a fake consulting gig, a blatant way for David to funnel money from our joint account directly into her pocket. For what? An allowance? A retainer? The expensive gifts, the hotel stays, it was all part of a long-running affair, funded by our shared finances. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was making me pay for it. The betrayal was so profound, so layered, it felt like I was discovering a new circle of hell every day. But Leo's best discovery was the morality clause. David's employer, the ultra-luxury fashion brand Armitage, had a very strict clause in its senior executive contracts. Any public conduct that brought disrepute, contempt, or scandal upon the brand was grounds for immediate termination. Armitage built its entire identity on an image of timeless elegance and integrity. A senior director embroiled in a messy, public scandal involving financial infidelity and fraud would be a brand's worst nightmare. This clause was the key ingredient. It was the baking soda that would make my revenge rise. My plan began to take shape, and it had 3 main components: financial separation, public revelation, and professional annihilation. First, the finances. With Leo's guidance, I began the painstaking process of disentangling myself. I opened a new bank account in my own name. I meticulously documented every fraudulent charge David had made, from Jessica's shopping sprees to the cash he pocketed from the Aria dinner. I compiled bank statements, credit card bills, and receipts into a neat, undeniable dossier of his deceit. Leo drew up divorce papers that cited financial fraud and adultery, calculating exactly how much he had stolen from me over the years. The number was well into 6 figures. We were preparing for a surgical strike, not a messy battle. Second, the public revelation. This was where Chloe's expertise came in. David's world revolved around image and perception. His friends, his colleagues, his entire social circle, they were his audience. I needed to control the narrative. A screaming match would make me look hysterical, just as he'd claimed. A quiet divorce would allow him to spin the story however he wanted, painting me as the bitter, unsuccessful wife he had to leave behind. I needed something more theatrical. Something unforgettable. And I knew the perfect stage: Armitage's annual fall gala. It was the biggest event of their corporate calendar, a lavish affair celebrating the launch of their new collection. David was on the planning committee. It was his baby, his chance to shine in front of the company's CEO and board of directors. He had been talking about it for months, obsessing over every detail. It was his coronation, part 2. And I was going to be the jester in the court. I started planning my own contribution to the gala. I called David, my voice sweet and conciliatory. I apologized for overreacting at the dinner. I told him he was right, that I was just emotional and didn't understand the pressure he was under. His relief was palpable. He was so convinced of his own superiority that he bought every word. "I'm glad you're finally seeing things clearly, Phonia," he said, his tone magnanimous, as if granting me a pardon. "I want to make it up to you," I said. "And to Armitage. I know how important this gala is. As a gesture of goodwill, I would like to offer my bakery services. I want to create a custom dessert table for the event. Free of charge, of course. My gift to you and the company." David was ecstatic. My little hobby was finally making itself useful, providing free, high-end catering for his most important night. He saw it as me falling back in line, accepting my role as a supporting character. He had no idea I was casting myself as the lead in a tragedy of his own making. The final 2 weeks before the gala were a blur of activity. During the day, I baked. At night, Chloe and I designed. We weren't just planning a dessert table, we were designing an art installation. The centerpiece was to be a magnificent, multi-tiered cake. A work of art. But the real surprise was in the smaller details. We designed beautiful, custom-printed menu cards for each dessert. We created elegant little takeaway boxes for the guests, each with a custom label. Every single element was designed with the same sophisticated, minimalist aesthetic as the Armitage brand itself. It was my audition to David's world, and I was determined to show them I could speak their language better than they could. Chloe and I were a whirlwind of creativity, fueled by coffee and the sweet, intoxicating promise of vengeance. The recipe was almost complete. All the ingredients were measured, the oven was preheating, and I was about to serve David a dessert he would never forget. The night of the Armitage Fall Gala arrived with a crisp, electric energy. I hadn't seen David in person since the dinner at Aria. He had moved into the guest room of our condo, and we communicated through terse texts about gala logistics. He was too consumed with his own self-importance to notice the quiet revolution brewing in his own home. He thought he was managing an event. I knew I was orchestrating a downfall. I arrived at the venue, a sprawling, opulent museum ballroom, with my team and the dessert installation. It was breathtaking. A 16-foot table was draped in black linen, upon which we arranged a symphony of sweets. There were miniature opera cakes, passion-fruit tarts with gold leaf, macarons in shades of charcoal and ivory, and delicate towers of croquembouche. At the center stood the cake, a 5-tiered architectural marvel in stark white, adorned with cascading, hand-pulled sugar sculptures that looked like frozen flames. It was elegant, sophisticated, and it screamed Armitage. David saw it and was floored. "Phonia, this is incredible," he stammered, looking from the cake to me. "I had no idea you could do something like this." His compliment was, as always, backhanded. "I had no idea you were this capable." "I wanted it to be perfect for you," I said, my smile as sweet and fragile as spun sugar. The guests began to arrive, a sea of black ties and designer gowns. The air buzzed with champagne-fueled chatter. David was in his element, preening and networking, occasionally gesturing toward my dessert table, taking credit for its magnificence. "My wife's little project," I heard him say to one of the board members. "She has a charming little bakery." I let him have his moment. The performance had to be flawless. I stood by my table, playing the part of the proud, supportive wife, explaining the different desserts to the guests who drifted over. Jessica was there, draped in diamonds and clinging to David's arm whenever she had the chance. She gave my dessert table a cursory glance, her lips pursed in a dismissive smirk. "How domestic," she said, before turning her back. I just smiled. Her time was coming. The main presentation of the night was scheduled for 9 p.m. The CEO of Armitage, a formidable older man named Mr. Abernathy, was set to give a speech, after which David would be brought on stage to be publicly lauded for his work on the new campaign and the gala itself. That was my cue. At 8:45 p.m., I gave my team a nod. They began placing the final touches on the display, the small, elegantly designed takeaway boxes for the guests. They worked quickly and efficiently, arranging them in perfect pyramids at either end of the table. At 9 p.m., the lights dimmed. Mr. Abernathy took the stage. He spoke about brand integrity, about luxury being synonymous with trust, about the impeccable image Armitage had cultivated for over a century. I could see David standing in the wings, puffing out his chest, ready for his moment of glory. As Mr. Abernathy began his glowing introduction for David, I made my move. I walked calmly to the front of the assembled crowd, holding a single, elegant takeaway box in my hand. I found a spot near the front, right in Mr. Abernathy's line of sight. A man whose vision and dedication represent the future of Armitage, Abernathy was saying. Please join me in welcoming our senior marketing director, David. The room erupted in applause. David walked onto the stage, his face split in a wide, triumphant grin. He shook Mr. Abernathy's hand and turned to the microphone. But before he could speak, I took a step forward. Mr. Abernathy, I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the perfect acoustics of the ballroom. Before David accepts this honor, I believe there's one more piece of his brand synergy you should all be aware of. A hush fell over the room. David's smile froze, his face paling as he saw me. All eyes turned to me, the baker in the simple black dress. My name is Phonia, I continued, my voice never wavering. I'm David's wife. The owner of the charming little bakery that provided these desserts tonight. David is a master of marketing. He markets a life of success and integrity. But like any good marketing campaign, it's an illusion. I held up the small box. David is so dedicated to the Armitage brand that he practices its principles in his own life. For instance, outsourcing. For the past year, he has been outsourcing his marital duties to his colleague, Jessica. I turned my head slightly and locked eyes with a horrified Jessica in the crowd. And he's a stickler for budgets. He financed this affair by systematically embezzling funds from our shared accounts, disguised as payments to a shell corporation owned by Jessica herself. He calls it Viridian Consulting. Gasps rippled through the audience. David stood on the stage, paralyzed, his face a mask of pure panic. Mr. Abernathy looked from me to David, his expression hardening into stone. But his real genius, I said, my voice dripping with ice, is in brand promotion. He believes in making a statement. A few weeks ago, he made a statement by treating his friends to a $4,000 dinner, calling me a disgrace in front of them, and then leaving me with the bill. But here's the marketing twist. He then committed credit card fraud by pocketing a $2,000 cash refund from the restaurant while still demanding I pay the full amount. I opened the elegant box I was holding. It didn't contain a pastry. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a copy of the fraudulent receipt from Uriah, a summary of the payments to Viridian Consulting, and a diamond necklace I had found tucked away in his briefcase, a gift I now knew was intended for Jessica. I believe in transparency, I announced to the silent, staring crowd. So, I've prepared a little something for everyone. In your takeaway boxes tonight, you won't just find a delicious macaron. You'll also find a complete, documented portfolio of David's extracurricular branding exercises. All the bank statements, the receipts, the proof of his affair and his fraud. My gift to you. A collective murmur swept the room as people started opening the boxes. The perfectly designed illusion of David's life shattered into a million pieces, right there on the stage, under the hot, unforgiving lights. David opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Mr. Abernathy, whose face was a thundercloud of fury. He looked at Jessica, who was already trying to slink away through the crowd. And then he looked at me. For the first time, he saw me not as his quaint wife, but as the architect of his complete and utter ruin. I gave him one last, small smile. "Enjoy your dessert," I said. Then I turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the beautiful, chaotic, and explosive aftermath of my creation behind me. I didn't need to see what happened next. I could already taste the sweetness of my victory. I didn't go back to Chloe's that night. I didn't need to hide anymore. I drove to the condo, the one that had felt like David's museum, and for the first time, it felt like it could be mine. The silence that greeted me wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. I walked through the rooms, no longer seeing his sterile aesthetic, but a blank canvas. I slept in the middle of my bed, a deep, dreamless sleep that was more restful than any I'd had in years. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. My phone started buzzing before dawn. It was Chloe, reading me gleeful excerpts from the city's top gossip blog, which had already picked up the story from a gala guest. Armitage exec flamed out in dessert disaster, the headline read. The story was everywhere. The combination of high society, fraud, and a dramatic public takedown was irresistible. David's carefully curated brand was incinerated overnight. He was fired, of course. Mr. Abernathy called an emergency board meeting the next morning. By 10 a.m., David's photo and bio were scrubbed from the Armitage website. The morality clause was his public guillotine. Jessica, the lifestyle influencer, found her life imploding as well. Her comment sections were flooded with furious messages. Brands that had sponsored her dropped her within hours. Her career, built on a foundation of fake authenticity, crumbled when exposed to a single dose of hard truth. David finally came back to the condo late the next day to collect his things. He didn't look like the confident, arrogant man who had stood on that stage. He looked small, defeated, and hollowed out. He didn't yell or scream. There was no fight left in him. "Why, Phonia?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper as he threw expensive suits into a suitcase. "Why couldn't you just leave? Why did you have to do all this?" I looked at him, feeling not anger, not even pity, but a kind of detached clarity. "You ask me that after everything you did?" I replied, my voice even. "You didn't just cheat on me, David. You tried to erase me. You belittled my work, stole my money, and humiliated me for your own amusement. You called me a disgrace in front of your world, so I decided to show your world exactly what a disgrace looks like." He zipped up his suitcase, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "You've ruined me," he said, shaking his head. "No, David," I corrected him gently. "I didn't ruin you. I just baked a cake with the ingredients you gave me. You should know more than anyone, presentation is everything." He had no response to that. He walked out of the condo, and out of my life, without looking back. Leo served him the divorce papers the next day. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had, he didn't fight it. He signed everything, agreeing to pay back every cent he had stolen, his arrogance replaced by a desperate need to avoid criminal charges. The months that followed were a renaissance. I sold the cold, minimalist furniture in the condo and filled it with warm, comfortable pieces that I chose. I painted the gray walls a soft, creamy white. I filled the space with plants, with art from local artists Chloe introduced me to, with the scent of baking from my clothes when I came home. It became my home, a reflection of me. The story of the Armitage Gala turned my bakery into a local legend. The rolling pin was inundated with customers. People came not just for the pastries, but to support the woman who had stood up for herself with such creativity and precision. I had to hire 4 new employees and expand into the storefront next door. News channels and magazines wanted to interview me. I was no longer the charming wife, I was a savvy business owner, a symbol of quiet strength. I even received a call from a boutique hotel chain, offering me a contract to design and supply the dessert menus for all their locations. My little hobby was becoming an empire. One afternoon, a few months later, Ben, the young waiter from Aria, came into the bakery. He had quit his job and was now pursuing his music full-time. He came to thank me, saying that what I did had inspired him to stop putting up with disrespect in his own life. We sat and had coffee, and for the first time, I felt the spark of a connection that wasn't based on a power dynamic or a performance. It was just two people, sharing a genuine moment of conversation. It was simple, and it was real. My life was my own now, built not on a foundation of lies and expectations, but on flour, sugar, hard work, and self-respect. I had learned that the most satisfying recipes aren't the ones you follow, but the ones you create yourself. David had tried to put me in a gilded cage, but he had underestimated one crucial thing: a baker knows exactly how to turn up the heat, and I had learned how to bake my own damn key. The taste of freedom, I discovered, was sweeter than any dessert I could ever create.